Michael Carter worked at a McDonald's in a busy city. He was in his early 20s with a kind heart and a strong work ethic. Most of his days were filled with serving customers, cleaning tables, and making sure everything in the restaurant ran smoothly. But there was something else that weighed heavily on his mind, something he couldn't ignore. Every evening after the lunch rush, he would notice a group of homeless children hanging around the area near the restaurant. They were mostly young, no older than 12 or 13, wearing worn-out clothes and looking tired. Sometimes they would sit near the restaurant, digging through the garbage for scraps of food. Michael couldn't bear to see them like that. He knew the rules at McDonald's. The restaurant had strict policies about food waste. Anything that was left over from the day was supposed to be thrown away at closing time. But Michael, with his kind heart, felt there had to be a way to help. He didn't want to see the food go to waste when there were people, especially children, who needed it. At first, Michael would just watch the kids from a distance, unsure of what to do. But soon, he started thinking of a plan. Every night before the store closed, he'd save a few portions of food that hadn't been touched. The meals weren't spoiled or stale. They were perfectly good, just leftover from the rush of customers earlier in the day. He would quietly set them aside, making sure his actions went unnoticed. When the restaurant was ready to close, and the final customers had left, Michael would take a deep breath and step outside. The kids were always there, waiting for something to eat. He would approach them quietly, making sure no one else saw what he was doing. With a smile, he would hand them the food. The kids, hungry and grateful, would accept it with thanks. They never asked where it came from, just happy that someone had taken the time to care. Michael didn't need any recognition for his actions. He simply wanted to make sure those kids had at least one decent meal each day. He learned their names slowly: Lily, Jake, Sam, and Emily. They were always polite, despite their tough circumstances. Michael couldn't imagine how difficult their lives must have been, but he knew he had to do something. His coworkers noticed, of course, and some of them even helped out once in a while, sneaking food to Michael so he could pass it on. They all understood why he was doing it, but they also warned him that it was risky. "You're breaking the rules," one coworker, Lisa, would tell him. "If the boss finds out, you could get in trouble." But Michael always just nodded and smiled. He couldn't stop helping. He knew he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just trying to make a small difference in a world that sometimes seemed so harsh. But little did he know, things were about to change in a way he never expected. His quiet acts of kindness were about to be discovered. As the days went by, Michael's routine continued. Every night, he'd save a few portions of food from the day's leftover meals, making sure they were still good and fresh. Sometimes it was a few fries. Other times, it was a chicken nugget meal or a burger that hadn't been touched. He would wrap it up carefully, making sure it didn't spill, and then sneak out after closing. The homeless kids, Lily, Jake, Sam, and Emily, were always waiting for him. They weren't always in the same spot, but Michael had learned where to find them. They would sit quietly together, talking to each other in low voices, trying to keep warm in the chilly evenings. It was a sad sight, but it became a routine for Michael to bring them something to eat. Every time he handed them a meal, their faces would light up with a smile, and Michael couldn't help but feel happy knowing that he'd made their day a little better. He never asked too many questions. He didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable. He knew that life was tough for them. Some nights, they would barely speak, and other times, they would tell him bits and pieces of their stories. Jake was the oldest, just barely 12, and he was always the one to thank Michael first. "Thanks, mister," he'd say with a shy smile, his voice rough but full of gratitude. Emily, the youngest, would smile too, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and relief. Sam and Lily were quieter but always nodded in appreciation. Michael tried to make sure their meals were filling, something they could eat and feel satisfied with. The food wasn't fancy, but it was better than the scraps they were used to. There was something special about these small moments. Michael felt like he wasn't just giving them food. He was giving them a little bit of dignity, a moment of normalcy in their otherwise difficult lives. As the days turned into weeks, Michael began to notice something. He wasn't just feeding them anymore. He was also learning about them. He noticed how Lily would always try to make sure the others got their share first, how Sam would make sure to help Emily when she had trouble eating. Despite everything they'd been through, the kids still cared for each other, which made Michael even more determined to help them. One night, just as he was about to go outside to deliver the food, he heard a voice behind him. It was one of his coworkers, Kevin. Kevin had seen Michael sneaking food out for a while, but hadn't said anything. "You know, you're risking your job," Kevin said quietly, looking over his shoulder to make sure no one else was around. "You could get into real trouble if anyone finds out." Michael paused, his heart sinking for a moment. He knew Kevin was right. McDonald's had strict policies about waste, and taking food outside could get him in serious trouble. But the thought of those kids going hungry kept him going. He wasn't breaking any laws. He was just helping kids who had nothing. "I know," Michael replied softly. "But I can't just ignore them." Kevin didn't say anything more, but Michael could tell he understood. Kevin was a good guy, and while he didn't agree with the rules, he knew Michael's heart was in the right place. That night, Michael went outside with the food, his hands shaking a little as he made his way to the kids. They were waiting for him, just like always. The smiles on their faces reminded him why he kept doing this, despite the risks. He wasn't just feeding them. He was making a difference in their lives, even if it was only for a few minutes. And that, to Michael, was worth everything. One evening, just as the sun was beginning to set, Michael stepped out into the cool night air with a tray of food in his hands, ready to continue his small act of kindness. He had prepared a meal with leftover burgers and fries. Nothing fancy, but enough to feed the kids who waited outside. As he stepped around the corner of the restaurant, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There, standing by the door, was Mr. Dawson, the restaurant manager. Michael's stomach dropped. Mr. Dawson was known for being strict about the rules, and Michael had always feared this moment would come. He had tried to keep his good deeds a secret, hoping that no one would notice, but now, here it was, the moment he had been dreading. Michael froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. He tried to pretend like he was just taking out the trash, but Mr. Dawson stepped forward with a stern look on his face. "Michael," he said, his voice cold and firm, "what are you doing out here with all that food?" Michael's heart raced. He knew he had to tell the truth, but he didn't want to lose his job. "I'm just giving it to the kids outside. The ones who are hungry," he said quietly, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. Mr. Dawson raised an eyebrow. "You're giving away McDonald's food. Do you realize the company's policies about food waste? That food is supposed to be thrown out, not handed out to people outside." His voice grew sharper as he spoke, and Michael could feel the tension in the air. Michael took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He had always known this day might come, but it still stung to hear the harshness in Mr. Dawson's words. "It's just leftovers. They don't go to waste. I'm helping them, Mr. Dawson. The kids are hungry, and I can't just let them go without food." For a moment, Mr. Dawson didn't say anything. He stood there, staring at Michael as if weighing his next words. Finally, he shook his head. "You're not supposed to be doing this. You could get the restaurant in trouble. If anyone finds out about this, it'll be on your head. Now go back inside and do your job. I don't want to see you outside with food again." Michael's heart sank, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. He knew it was pointless. He nodded, turned on his heel, and walked back into the restaurant, the food still clutched tightly in his hands. The kids outside were waiting, but now he wasn't sure if he should keep going or if this would be the last time he could help them. As he walked through the kitchen, his coworkers gave him concerned glances. Lisa, one of his friends at the counter, whispered to him, "What happened? Did he see you?" Michael just shook his head, not trusting himself to speak. He didn't want to risk saying anything that might get him in more trouble. He felt defeated, but he knew he couldn't just give up on those kids. He had seen their faces, heard their voices, and knew they needed help. But the weight of Mr. Dawson's words hung heavy in his mind. Would he really be fired for helping them? Was it worth risking everything for something so small? Michael wasn't sure, but as the night wore on, his mind kept returning to one simple thought. He had to do something. He couldn't just walk away. The next morning, Michael woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest. He had gone to bed the night before wondering if Mr. Dawson's warning would come back to haunt him. And now, sitting in his small apartment, he could barely shake the feeling of dread. He had always been the type of person who followed the rules, who did his job to the best of his ability. But what happened last night had felt different. He had been doing something good, something he believed in, and now he was being punished for it. As the hours passed, Michael tried to push the thoughts out of his mind, but it was impossible. He was due to work the afternoon shift, and he wasn't sure how to face Mr. Dawson or his coworkers after the confrontation. Would things go back to normal? Or would the manager take it further? By the time he arrived at McDonald's that afternoon, the weight on his shoulders had only grown heavier. He walked through the restaurant's back door, where the employees usually clocked in, and immediately noticed the tense atmosphere. No one was talking much, and the usual buzz of the kitchen seemed quieter than usual. Kevin, one of his friends at work, approached him with a worried look on his face. "Hey, Michael, you okay? I overheard Mr. Dawson talking to the district manager. They're not happy about what happened last night." Kevin's voice was low, like he didn't want anyone else to overhear. Michael nodded slowly, trying to hide his nervousness. "I know. I'm just trying to get through today." Kevin hesitated, clearly unsure whether to say more. "Listen, I don't think they'll fire you. But Mr. Dawson's pretty upset. He might make it hard for you to stay. You know how he is." Michael tried to swallow the knot in his throat. It was hard to imagine losing this job. He had bills to pay, rent to cover, and a future that depended on him making it through. But there was something inside of him, a quiet voice that told him he couldn't just give up, not without a fight. The shift went on, and Michael tried his best to stay focused on his work, but his thoughts kept drifting to the kids outside, waiting for a meal he could no longer give them. He felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He had always been the one to take care of others, to help those in need, and now he was being forced to stop. He wasn't sure if he could live with that. Just as he was cleaning a table, Mr. Dawson walked in from the back office. The manager's face was stern, and Michael could tell he was about to have another conversation he didn't want to have. "Michael," Mr. Dawson called, his voice cold. "I need you in the office. Now." Michael's heart sank. He followed Mr. Dawson to the back, feeling the eyes of his coworkers on him. As he walked into the small office, the air felt thick with tension. Mr. Dawson closed the door behind them, and Michael could already sense the weight of what was about to come. "Sit down," Mr. Dawson instructed, his voice sharp. Michael did as he was told, not sure what to expect next. The manager stood by the desk, his arms crossed. "You've been warned about giving food away, Michael. You know the rules. I've had complaints about your behavior from higher-ups. They're not happy." Michael took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. He had expected this, but it still hurt to hear the words. "I wasn't trying to break the rules," he said quietly. "I was just helping some kids who were hungry. They needed food, and I knew the leftovers were going to be thrown away anyway." Mr. Dawson stared at him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the silence felt suffocating. Then, finally, he spoke again. "I don't care about your reasons. The company's policies are clear. If I don't report this, I'm risking my own job, and you're risking yours." Michael swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Dawson took a deep breath. "You're fired. Effective immediately." Michael's heart dropped into his stomach. It felt like the world was crashing down around him. He had known the risks, but hearing the words out loud still stung. He couldn't believe it was happening. Everything he had worked for, everything he believed in, was slipping away in that moment. He stood up slowly, trying to keep his composure. "I understand," he said, his voice steady despite the pain. He had always believed in doing what was right, but sometimes doing the right thing didn't come without consequences. He walked out of the office, feeling defeated, knowing he had lost his job, but also knowing he had done what he thought was best. He just didn't know what would come next. As Michael walked out of the restaurant that day, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He had been fired, something he never thought would happen. The weight of it felt heavy, but at the same time, he couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. He had done the right thing, even if it cost him his job. As he stepped outside, the cool breeze brushed against his face, but it didn't bring any comfort. His thoughts were still on the kids he had been helping, the ones who depended on him for food. He had made a difference in their lives, no matter how small. But now he had no way of knowing if they would go hungry again. He stood there for a moment, taking in the bustling street around him. Cars honked, people hurried along the sidewalk, and life seemed to move on without him. He felt lost in the crowd, uncertain about what to do next. But just as he was about to pull out his phone to call a friend, he noticed a man standing by the entrance of a nearby cafe. The man was dressed in a sharp suit, his posture confident, but there was something different about him. Something that made Michael stop and take notice. The man smiled and waved, catching Michael's attention. "Hey there, you're Michael, right?" the man called out, his voice warm and inviting. Michael blinked, confused. "Yeah, that's me," he said, wondering how this stranger knew his name. The man walked over to him with a friendly grin. "I hope you don't mind me approaching you like this. I'm Richard Lawson. I was actually at the McDonald's last night when you were handing out food to the kids." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, you saw that?" he asked, feeling a little embarrassed. "I didn't mean for anyone to notice." Richard laughed softly. "Don't worry about it. I wasn't there to judge. I just saw what you were doing, and it really impressed me. I wanted to talk to you." Michael was still confused. "I'm not sure what you mean. I was helping some kids who needed food. I didn't think it was a big deal." Richard shook his head, his eyes filled with understanding. "It's a big deal, Michael. What you did wasn't just about giving food. You cared enough to make sure those kids didn't go hungry, even if it meant breaking the rules. That's rare, and it's something I admire." Michael wasn't sure what to say. He had never thought of it that way. "Thanks, but I don't know if it was worth it. I lost my job over it." Richard's expression softened. "I heard, and I'm really sorry about that. But sometimes doing the right thing comes with a price, doesn't it?" Michael nodded, a little surprised at how easy it was to talk to this stranger. "I guess so. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't just watch those kids go hungry." Richard smiled again, and for the first time in a while, Michael felt a flicker of hope. "I think you're the kind of person the world needs more of. That's why I want to offer you a job. I run a nonprofit organization that helps provide food and shelter for homeless families. We're always looking for people who care about making a real difference." Michael's eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait, you want to hire me?" Richard nodded. "Absolutely. You've already shown that you're dedicated to helping others. I think you'd be a great fit for our team. We can make sure the kids you care about have all the food they need, and more. And you'll be doing work that truly matters." Michael was speechless. He hadn't expected this at all. After everything that had happened, he hadn't known where his life would go next. But now, here was this stranger offering him a chance to do what he loved, helping people who needed it most. I don't know what to say," Michael finally managed. "You don't have to say anything right now," Richard said with a reassuring smile. "Take some time to think about it. But know this, you're not alone. You've got a place to make a real difference, and I want you to be a part of it." Michael's mind was racing. He had just lost his job. But now he was being offered something even more meaningful, a chance to work with people who shared his values, to help kids like the ones he had been feeding. He felt a spark of excitement deep inside him. Maybe this was the new beginning he had been hoping for. "Thank you," Michael said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I'd love to talk more about this. I think it could be exactly what I need." Richard clapped him on the back. "I'm glad to hear that. Let's set up a meeting for tomorrow. I think you'll love what we're doing." As Michael watched Richard walk away, he couldn't help but feel like his life was about to take a turn for the better. Sometimes, things didn't go as planned, but maybe, just maybe, that was exactly how life was supposed to work. The next day, Michael met with Richard at the non-profit organization's office. It wasn't a large building, but it had a warm, welcoming atmosphere. The walls were lined with photos of families and children, all with smiling faces. There was a sense of hope in the air, something Michael hadn't felt in a long time. It reminded him of the kids he had helped, the ones who were always waiting outside the McDonald's, looking for a meal. Richard greeted him with a firm handshake and a smile. "I'm really glad you could make it today, Michael. I think you'll like what we're doing here." Michael smiled back, a little nervous but excited. "Thanks for giving me the chance to come by. I really appreciate it." Richard led him down a hallway and into a cozy meeting room. There were a few people sitting around a table, discussing plans and ideas. Michael could see that everyone seemed focused on their work, but there was a friendliness about them that immediately put him at ease. "This is our team," Richard said, introducing each person. "Everyone here is passionate about helping those who are struggling. And Michael, I think you'll fit in perfectly with what we're trying to do." Michael took a seat at the table, his heart racing a little. He had never worked in this kind of environment before, but it felt right. The conversation started as Richard explained more about the organization's mission, helping homeless families by providing food, shelter, and support. The goal was to not only give people what they needed, but to help them build a better future. As the meeting went on, Michael listened closely. He had worked in fast food before, but this was different. He wasn't just talking about food or serving customers. He was talking about making a real difference, something that went beyond handing out meals. The idea of being part of something bigger, something that helped people get back on their feet, filled him with excitement. "I think you're going to find this work really fulfilling," Richard said, noticing the look on Michael's face. "We've got a lot of projects coming up, and we're always looking for people who are dedicated to the cause. You've got the heart for it, Michael." Michael nodded, feeling the truth in Richard's words. He had always wanted to do more, to help others in a way that truly mattered. This was the opportunity he had been looking for. As the meeting wrapped up, Richard pulled Michael aside. "I want to offer you a position here," he said. "We need someone who can work directly with families and children, helping them find food and shelter. You've already shown that you care about making a difference, and I believe you'll be a great addition to the team." Michael couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Are you sure? I mean, I don't have much experience with this kind of work." Richard smiled. "You don't need experience. What you have is a genuine care for people, and that's more important than anything. We can teach you the rest." For the first time in what felt like forever, Michael felt a sense of hope. He had lost his job at McDonald's, but in doing so, he had found something even more meaningful. He wasn't just helping people with a meal anymore. He was becoming part of something that could change lives, including his own. "I'd love to accept the offer," Michael said, his voice filled with gratitude. Richard grinned. "Great. I'm looking forward to seeing you get started. Welcome to the team." As Michael walked out of the office that afternoon, he felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. The future seemed brighter now, and he knew he was about to embark on a journey that would change his life, and the lives of so many others, for the better. In the weeks that followed, Michael quickly found himself adjusting to his new role at the nonprofit. The work was different from anything he had done before, but he quickly realized that it was exactly what he had been searching for. Instead of simply handing out food, he was helping families rebuild their lives, offering them more than just a meal. He was offering hope. Each day, Michael worked alongside a dedicated team of volunteers and staff members. They would visit shelters, distribute food, and help families find housing and employment. It was hard work, but Michael found it incredibly rewarding. Every time he saw a child smile or a family take their first steps toward a better future, it reminded him why he had chosen this path. There were some tough days too. Sometimes, the families they helped didn't have the resources to stay in a shelter, or the jobs they had lined up fell through. There were moments when Michael felt frustrated, when he questioned whether they were making a difference at all. But then he'd remember the kids, the faces of those who had been hungry and now had a place to stay, a warm meal to eat, and that kept him going. One of the most memorable moments for Michael came during a visit to a local shelter. A mother, Sarah, had just moved in with her 2 young children, and she was struggling to adjust to her new life. She was grateful for the shelter but didn't know how to make the next step. Her children were quiet, withdrawn, and Michael could sense the worry in her eyes. One day, as Michael was handing out food, Sarah came up to him. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice shaky. "You've given us food, but it's more than that. You've given us a chance. I don't know how we'll ever repay you." Michael smiled, but the words felt hollow. "You don't need to repay us," he said gently. "We're here to help, not for thanks. You're strong, and you're doing your best. That's enough." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Michael didn't know what to say. But he realized that sometimes the most important thing wasn't the food or the shelter. It was offering a listening ear, showing someone that they weren't alone. And in that moment, he knew that this was what he was meant to do. As time went on, Michael grew closer to the people he worked with. He became good friends with some of the volunteers, and they often shared stories about their own struggles and successes. They all had different backgrounds, but they were united by one common goal: to help people in need. Michael felt a deep sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. He had always wanted to make a difference, but now he was truly part of something bigger than himself. Richard, the man who had given him the opportunity, became a mentor to Michael. Richard had been running the organization for years, and his passion for helping others was contagious. He often took Michael aside to offer advice or to share his vision for the future. "You've got a lot of potential," Richard would say. "You can do more than just help people on the ground. I see you running your own program one day." Michael was taken aback by the compliment. "You really think so?" he asked, unsure of himself. Richard nodded. "Absolutely. You've got the heart for this, and that's the most important thing. We're not just helping people survive, we're helping them thrive." That was a turning point for Michael. He began to realize that this job wasn't just about giving food or offering shelter. It was about empowering people to take control of their own lives again. And as he helped more families and children, he started to see the impact he was making. Slowly but surely, the community he was helping was changing. At the end of each day, when Michael went home, he felt exhausted but fulfilled. There were no long hours of serving food to customers or pushing people through the drive-thru. There were no strict rules about wasting food or policies that kept him from doing the right thing. Instead, Michael felt like he was truly making a difference. But most importantly, he knew he had found his purpose. Helping people was no longer just a job. It was his passion. And as he looked back on everything that had happened, losing his job, meeting Richard, and finding his way to this new path, he realized that sometimes the most unexpected moments in life led to the greatest changes. Michael was exactly where he needed to be. Months passed, and Michael's life continued to change in ways he never could have imagined. His work at the nonprofit had not only transformed the lives of the people he helped, but it had also changed him. He had become more confident, more sure of himself and his purpose. Every day, he felt grateful for the chance to make a difference in people's lives. One afternoon, as Michael was organizing a community event to raise awareness about homelessness, He found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about his old job at McDonald's, the job he had been so proud of before everything fell apart. At the time, it had felt like the worst thing that could happen to him. But now, looking back, he realized it had been the push he needed to find his true calling. He had been scared when he lost his job. He had worried about how he would pay his bills, what his next steps would be. But the moment he had chosen to help those kids outside the restaurant, everything had changed. That small act of kindness had led him to Richard and to this incredible new opportunity. Michael's thoughts were interrupted when he noticed a family walking toward the event. A mother, her teenage son, and a young girl. They were all smiling, and Michael recognized them immediately. It was Sarah, the woman he had helped months ago, when she had first arrived at the shelter with her children. She was holding a bag of food, and her kids were happily chatting as they approached him. "Michael," Sarah called, waving as she walked up to him. "I just wanted to thank you again for everything you did for us. We've been doing so much better, and I don't know where we'd be without you." Michael smiled warmly. "I'm so glad to see you all. How's everything going?" Sarah's face lit up as she spoke. "We're in a new apartment now, and I started a new job. It's been hard, but I'm learning every day, and the kids are so much happier. They've made friends at school, and things are finally starting to feel normal again." Her son, now smiling and more confident, added, "And I'm helping out at the local community center. They said I could volunteer and even get some work experience for later." Michael's heart swelled with pride. Seeing Sarah and her kids thriving was all the proof he needed that he was doing the right thing. "That's amazing," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You all have come such a long way. I'm really proud of you." Sarah's eyes sparkled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you. You gave us the push we needed when we felt lost. You made us believe that we could do more, and now we're making it happen." As Michael watched them walk away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment deep within. This was why he had chosen this path, to see people like Sarah, who had once been uncertain and struggling, now finding their feet again. He had been part of their journey, and it was one of the most rewarding experiences of his life. That evening, as Michael sat in his apartment reflecting on the day, he realized just how far he had come. He had gone from working a job that, in the end, didn't give him the satisfaction he craved, to being part of something truly meaningful. He wasn't just helping to provide food. He was helping to rebuild lives, to give people a chance at a new beginning. In the quiet of his apartment, Michael made a promise to himself. He would continue doing this work for as long as he could. He had found his purpose, and he wasn't going to stop now. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still many challenges ahead, but Michael knew one thing for sure. He had made the right choice. The road to helping others had led him here, and he was determined to keep walking it. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt truly at peace, knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The journey had been difficult, but in the end, it had been worth every step.